And now it's time for the rank punditry section of the New Hampshire Journal podcast. And when I say rank, I mean Neil Levesque, head of the New Hampshire Institute of Politics out at beautiful St. A's College. We also, kind of to leaven the experience, we have the lovely and talented Sarah Scott with Americans for Prosperity of New Hampshire. Welcome. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having us on.
I'm delighted to have you on, and it's this has been one of those crazy political weeks where there's stuff happening at every level, from Iran and Lebanon all the way to Lebanon, New Hampshire. For example, I don't know if either of you caught Karen Leott Hill's performance at the tax day hearing in Concord on Wednesday. The Republicans obviously have seized on this income tax issue. They proposed a constitutional amendment to ban it. Democrats have voted against it. Now they brought another one back. Virtually every Democrat's going to vote against it again. But Karen Leott Hill showed up and gave a great presentation for her team about why there's costs are downshifting and it's not fair for the towns. She was terrific. And I could see people going, wow, why isn't she running for governor instead of am I wrong, Sarah Scott, the non-existent Cindy Warmington? I mean, have you spotted her?
I mean, I think the fact of the matter is that whichever Democrat signs up to run for governor knows they're getting into a losing race. And anybody that has real potential and political aspirations for after this, they're not jumping in this to lose.
So Neil Levesque, I read the polling from St. Anselm College Survey Center, and it shows that Governor Ayotte's numbers are only meh. Why would the Democrats be doomed to lose?
Well, I think she has headwinds, I think, from Trump, frankly, even though she doesn't do a lot of national things at all. And she hasn't nationalized any of her performances, and I don't think she'll nationalize the race. That being said, I think that there's enthusiasm on the Democratic side, and that's going to show up in the polling. Why hasn't, well, I think Warmington, I'll give her some credit that she just got in and she's raising money and things like that. Our polling on the income tax showed very weak numbers for a pro-tax position, even amongst Democrats. So I think that if you're thinking about running for governor, you can't necessarily embrace that. Councilor Ayotte Hill, she is very eloquent. She's really showing she does some great performances during her executive council meetings. She's stood up for some interesting things, and she's really certainly becoming a bright light for the Democrats.
I did find it interesting, though, on that she didn't use the same argument as a lot of other Democrats during the hearing. A lot of them focused right on the property tax issue, and I did find that interesting that she switched kind of gears on that.
Well, so the problem that Democrats have had in New Hampshire on the income tax issue is they say no income tax is the reason why the state is starving revenue and they're not sending money to the cities, towns, and schools. And then someone in the state just holds up the numbers and goes, well, actually, you're completely wrong. They've sent more money year after year after year since at least 2016. So that's a factual problem. Karen Leott Hill had a brilliant argument. She goes, oh, no. I don't mean like recently. I mean, there's structural problems. They screwed the cities and towns out of meals and hotel rooms, taxes. They screwed us on the pensions for workers when the state was going to pay a certain amount. Blah, blah, blah. So she's at least given them an argument. But did you notice, Sarah Scott, what her answer was when they asked her, so you're here to support an income tax?
Nobody wants to come right out and talk about supporting an income tax. It doesn't play well. We've seen this in the polls time and time again. There's never been a poll that's come out that said the majority of Granite Staters support an income tax, and they never will. So this is really
her answer was, I'm not here to talk about that. It's literally the income tax ban legislation, and she's not here to talk about the income tax, which goes back to that's why I go back to the big question here, Neil. It would be so easy for Democrats to move away from the trans boys and girls sports and bathroom thing. The polls are overwhelming. Just come up with some compromise, pass it, move on it. On the income tax, they could propose, say, a supermajority instead of banning it outright. They could find, and instead they are going down with the ship. Why do you think it is that state level Democrats are casting ballots that show no a moderation or accommodation at all with where the voters are and what the polls show?
Well, I think it's on both sides of the aisle, and I'll say that the more active, some people use the word extreme, but I would say more active people in politics tend to get elected to the legislature who are involved with politics. And as a result, I think they're very vocal about things like the income tax. I think that people in the know who say we want to win, and by the way, we're Democrats, they do not want any discussion about an income tax right now. This is not part of that plan. This is not some big orchestrated thing from the Democratic committee in Concord, New Hampshire at all. I think they want to talk about things like Trump because Trump's numbers are so poor in New Hampshire. They don't want to talk about an income tax and they don't want to talk about these other things. And look, Senator Jean Shaheen made her whole career about running for governor being opposed to an income tax. They know that if you want to win, you've got to have a certain position on a statewide tax like that, and they don't want to go anywhere near it. I think that if they can focus on nationalizing elections and focus on Trump, they may have success. But if they start having more and more um, pro-income tax rallies and statements and things like that, it may be more difficult. And that's based upon polling, not necessarily my own opinion.
Right. So, Sarah Scott, AFP New Hampshire, you guys follow state legislation. You're watching these votes and you see them. Isn't it the case that the reason why the Democrats in New Hampshire are voting for wildly unpopular stuff with the general election electorate is that they're just assuming that Trump is going to get them elected, and they can vote out, but they can support mandatory cannibalism tomorrow, and they'd be fine with that because Trump, right?
I think that's a large part of it, but I also think that when it comes to the income tax issue, they didn't intend to end up here. This was brought upon them by Andrew Volinsky, and I don't think they had any idea that this was coming. He came out with his plan for an income tax, and I think they were caught off guard and didn't know how to respond to the situation. So I think that had they had time to prepare and figure out a real strategy, they obviously would have preferred that this had never come up at all because it's given Republicans a great opportunity to go after them. It's going to continue to hurt them, I think, throughout the election because we've now got a lot of great lines from yesterday's hearing that Republicans can throw up on a mailer and say, this Democrat supported an income tax. But overall, I think that Democrats are going to have to focus on the national issues because people in New Hampshire like overall the direction of things in New Hampshire. They do not like the direction of things nationally. So I think that Trump does definitely hurt Republicans in New Hampshire. So the more Democrats can focus on how bad things are at the federal level, the better it is for them.
So let me try the same question another way. So what do what do voters in New Hampshire like? They like opposing income taxes. They like not having an income tax. They love not having sales tax, and they love voting against Trump. That's why when Biden was on the ballot, he wasn't on the ballot. When Biden wasn't on the ballot in 2024 by himself, they had to write him in. Like 70,000 people turned out to write him in. So, Sarah Scott, in November, will any votes matter, or will it simply be Democratic turnout is going to be crazy through the roof? Republicans have got to find a way to turn out their votes. Otherwise, it's going to be a very long night.
I do think that you're right that it's going to be tough on Republicans to figure out a way to get people out to vote. I don't see any reason why Democrats are not going to be motivated to come out in November. It is going to be an uphill battle for Republicans. The affordability issue is huge. And unfortunately, I don't think we've seen a whole lot of progress on that at the federal level, even from Republicans. I don't see us getting to a point in November where suddenly the cost of living is fixed and we're all happy with what we're paying and earning. I don't think that's a reality. So Republicans are definitely going to have a tough time of convincing voters that they are the right party to take on the economy and actually show progress. I
The
think it's
Levesque issues.
possible, though.
Well, I'll say this. I don't think that voters know what they are going to care about in November. I just think things move so quick now,
Right.
particularly with the administration and the way that communication is, that they may not even know what they're going to care about in November. And so it's hard to predict what's going to happen. I'll say this, despite the fact that I think the odds were against him, if Trump actually opens up the strait and oil prices start to go down, and he succeeded in his goal of basically taking out this terrorist threat, I think that here's another thing where all the cards were stacked against him and he pulled it off. This has happened before. We heard, in Venezuela, the same type of thing. Oh, this is a disaster. Well, so far, it's turned out that it's actually to the U.S. advantage, I think.
Mm.
So he's pulled that off politically, and I think he could pull this off. And if he does, and oil prices go down and our
Right.
cost of living sort of settles out, Americans, though, even if we look back in the last 30 years and we pick out a
Right.
segment of time when the economy was great, and we asked Americans at that time whether or not they were happy with the economy, they'll say no. And they didn't like the track that the country was on. Americans seem to be perpetually pessimistic
That's right.
always about the economy, even when statistically things are good.
They're not pessimistic. They're grumpy and angry and spoiled and confused, and the world's changing a lot, and tech and AI is freaking them out, and their kids are saying words they don't understand. And if one more kid says 6'7" in front of me, I'm going to have to go to jail for smacking some kid in the head. And so then people are just grumpy. There's a foul mood. America, the world, we're all just in this foul, bad mood. But so Sarah Scott, the Chuck McGee, former chair of the New Hampshire General Republican Party, says voters give you no credit. If Trump if Trump accomplishes the most important foreign policy success since Reagan and the Berlin Wall and topples the Iranian regime, and we're able to literally go on vacation in Havana, Caracas, and Tehran, voters will still say, "Yeah, but what have you done for me? My bread was $3. I don't know about you." So, is that how you think voters react, or is it possible that the record in the Concord of fighting off the income tax and lowering taxes and addressing issues like social issues like the trans issue, that the voters will remember in November, and if things are better, they'll go, "Okay, I'm going to keep you around."
I think there's like a half truth to that.
Okay.
Voters do have a really short-term memory. So what happens right now, if there is some kind of a major victory right now, it's not going to last till November, but it at least gives
Mm.
people a direction. I think repeated victories in that way are something that people will remember come November. But a one-off win now, especially if it's at the state level,
Mhm.
if we see Republicans having big wins at the state level right now, I don't think that's going to translate into victories in November.
Mhm.
People are barely paying attention to what happens at the state level at all. So if Trump has a victory now, I think that's good. But especially when it comes to Trump, you know that there's
Right.
usually one step forward and two steps back. And so I don't think that that's necessarily going to translate, but I do agree that there's a short-term memory issue for sure.
So one area you can see the difference in enthusiasm, Neil Levesque, is in fundraising. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that Maura Sullivan by herself and Stephanie Shaheen by herself have raised more money than the Republican known candidates in those races from donors. Anthony DiLorenzo and Holly Novleski and Representative Brian Cole and Melissa Bailey. Now, Anthony DiLorenzo has more money because he put a bunch of his own money in, but he only raised $92,000 from actual donors. Far far less than the 500,000 from by Stephanie Shaheen and the 700,000 by Maura Sullivan. How do Republicans? It's two things. Do you agree with me that that's a sign of the enthusiasm gap? And two, how do Republicans overcome something like that?
I think it's a sign of the enthusiasm gap, but I'll attribute it to something else, and that is this Washington think. Okay, there's people in Washington, they have to figure out 435 different seats, and it's much easier for them to say, okay, that's a D, a +3D. I'm not going to send money there. I'm going to send it over here, and then it's easier to just put it into those things. But the truth is that anyone can win in politics, and there are usually in election night many surprises. And so the money may not always follow those winners, and we've seen that time and time again. Is there more enthusiasm right now on the Democratic side? Sure. Democrats have also held seats here on the congressional side for quite a while and do so now. Is it easier for someone who is a sitting member of Congress who's running for, let's say, the United States Senate, like Congressman Pappas? Is it easier for him? He's a known candidate in Washington to raise money. Absolutely, it is easier, and they're all crawling at the same amount and same donors to some degree. I do think it is interesting that some of these candidates, if you dig deeper, that a lot of the money isn't even raised in New Hampshire. They're
Right,
spending an awful lot of money. So they may collect a dollar, but they're sending 80 cents doing it.
right.
They're buying lists and hiring high priced people to do it. because they want to show that big number. But I think also if you are now Stephanie Shaheen's gotten some criticism because her numbers are not as high as
Right.
other candidates, but a lot of that money comes from New Hampshire. So is that a sign that she has enthusiastic backers in New Hampshire? And I think that that's probably the case if you look at the polling. I think that some of the Republicans, though, need to do better because right now they have a credibility gap. And the sort of word on the street is that, like in the first CD, that no one's going to beat the Democrat. Well,
Right.
Jeb Bradley, I think if he were on this show, would say, "Well, I did it, and why can't they?" And so,
Come
where
on.
where's the
That's
money?
like say, that
You know,
that's like saying, remember that time that South Carolina elected that Democrat to the, yeah, sure, absolutely. It's called the Civil War. I mean, we get to
well,
give us
I'll counter
context.
that with this. Let's take
Jeb Bradley couldn't win the first congressional district with every endorsement of every living human being outside the first district in 2026. What a load. Come on.
I'll counter that with this. The most popular Republican in New Hampshire right now is probably, even though he's not on the ballot, Chris Sununu. If Chris
Right.
Sununu ran the first congressional district as a Republican,
Absolutely.
he would probably do pretty well. And so you have to say that, is it a candidate quality? Is it the fact that there's name ID known amongst voters? Voters have a familiarity with someone and they trust that person, particularly in the age of AI when 95% of everything we're getting over our Instagram and on Twitter is an AI generated, screenshot. And so
Hmm.
I think that they voters may say, "Hey, I know that person, and I'm going to vote for that person." And I think that that is something where uh, right now the Republicans running for the first CD don't necessarily have a lot of that.
So I'm not going to recount, Sarah Scott, all the ways that Neil is wrong. There's too many, and we don't have so much time. I'll just remind everybody: Republicans don't win federal elections in New Hampshire, and the only thing I have on my side is data. I don't have all the other stuff about magic people from other centuries or who aren't running. So let me ask you, Sarah Scott, about the U.S. Senate race, where you have the same thing. Chris Pappas has raised more money by himself than Johnny Sununu and Scott Brown combined. Scott Brown had the not great filing where he showed he was actually spending more money raising small dollars than he was collecting from the small dollars. Over at AFP, I know you guys have endorsed Johnny Sununu. How, generally speaking, how do you view that race, and particularly put in the context of the national, fight for control of Congress and the U.S. Senate?
I think obviously Chris Pappas has raised more money because, again, he has been down in Washington more recently than John Sununu has. He has a lot of those connections, and he is not in a primary. Now, I think what we've seen from, well, I guess you could say he is in a primary. It's not a serious primary at this point.
Right.
But I think based on those initial fundraising numbers, on the Republican side, we're seeing that that might start to be the case for Republicans too. Scott Brown's fundraising numbers were not good. I think he's going to be in a death spiral at this point, looking at how he could possibly recover from it. I just think it shows that GOP donors are solidly behind Sununu at this point. I know that we've heard that Scott Brown is not looking to get out of the race. We'll see how long he can hold on with the money that he does have on hand. But I think that having one person who is clearly the nominee definitely helps with fundraising. But I think also you tend to see that Democrats do raise more money, but that hasn't stopped Republicans from winning in the past.
You look at the national numbers and the mountains of money going to Democratic U.S. Senate candidates in places like Texas and North Carolina and Ohio, and it's like they're blowing the doors. Not twice as much money as the Republicans, but three, four, five times as much money as Republicans. And to me, I agree with you. The money problem thing can be solved. The Republican committees, for example, tend to have about twice as much money as the Democratic committees, and so there'll be that whole money, but. It, if you got a call from GOP Central right now, Neil Levesque, and they said, we got to find a way to get Republicans to turn out, that's going to be our problem. It's not going to be that they agree with Democrats or they don't like our policies. They don't have the pep in their step that Democrats do. Do you have an idea for a topic they could talk about, or a spokesperson that they could have out that might get them a little more pumped?
Well, I don't think that they should bring in national spokespeople at all. And I don't want to give advice to one party or another, but I think that that's probably why the income tax this week was so
Right.
highlighted by Republicans in Concord, New Hampshire. That is a motivating issue. I think you also mentioned what some people refer to as bathroom issues, trans issues, and things like that, that are definitely things that I think you're going to see in advertising here that's going to motivate people where we didn't necessarily see motivation before. And I think um, they have to find, there could be other issues too. I mean, if we get dragged into a bigger mess with Iran and there's gas prices are $5 a gallon, uh, that's going to be hard to overcome
We're
in
running out
either
of time, and I want to
with
call an
any issue.
audible. Sarah Scott, I want to call an audible for Sarah Scott. You get to be the AFP New Hampshire person, which means you don't have to be the AFP Massachusetts person or Vermont person or California person or New York person. So do they all like look at you with envy? Like, are they all like, do they see you and burst into tears because you're part of this state where, we have the lowest taxes of the lower 48 as net tax burden. We have the best return on investment, no income tax, no sales tax, and they got to go back to their home states where literally in Massachusetts and Maine, they just raised taxes. And in Massachusetts, they're fighting to stop a referendum that just cuts the income tax by 1%. You've got to, I mean, you must like are you living the charmed life, Sarah Scott?
I thank God every day that I was born in New Hampshire and not one of these other states. Um, yeah, I'll be honest, when I talk to people that are working in these other states, and I hear about the things that they're fighting, their
Mhm.
victories are something that I would almost consider a loss in New Hampshire for the most part. The fact that they have to fight some of these bad policies, and they are rough conversations because they think we have it easy here. And I
Right.
don't think it's that we have it easy. I mean, we have historically over the years put in a lot of work to keep the New Hampshire advantage the way it is, but they are making it so easy for us to point out the
Right.
stark differences between New Hampshire and all of the other states. I know if you look at, for example, the income tax issue, you can point to all of the other states around us. You see Massachusetts has been sending so many people into New
That's
Hampshire. It's
right.
brought a significant amount of money. We saw earlier this week from the Josiah Bartlett Center, I think it was almost $6 billion
$6 billion, right?
that's come up from Massachusetts. And we don't have to do a whole lot to make the case other than look at those other states and point and say, we're not them. We don't even have to brag about how great we
Right.
are, other than we're not like that. When you look at the energy issue, too, New Hampshire
Right.
has high energy prices, but we're not making a lot of the same mistakes that other states have. You see a lot of governors in the Northeast that are walking back their green energy subsidy plans and trying to assure ratepayers that we're making changes here where we're going to reduce that gas tax that we just increased.
Right.
We're going to roll back these, voucher plans for
Mhm.
energy efficient appliances. New Hampshire is not having to do any of that, and I think voters do pay attention. I would hate to be a Republican working in a lot of those other states.
Right. I will also say that one of the things that's going to help, I think, Governor Kelly Ayotte and maybe the Republicans is the bad example of their neighboring states. I mean, it makes, do you want, because no matter what Cindy Warmington does, she's going to be representing the team of Massachusetts, Vermont, and Maine. That's going to be your team. So let's wrap up with this. Pick a winner or a loser for the previous week, starting with Neil Levesque.
Well, we talked about this offline, but JD Vance went to Hungary. That didn't turn out so well.
No, it did
And I
not.
disagree with you. I think that Vance probably shouldn't have, if he knew that the talks in Iran were going to fall apart, he probably shouldn't have gone himself. Maybe send the Secretary of State, not the Vice President of the United States. And I think that those have fallen apart. And I know you disagree with Michael, but I think that it wasn't a good week for him.
Well, the reason it's not a good week is you're right about Hungary, but also he has been trying to straddle the anti-war, bring it all home, America first, yada yada people, and then Trump sent him on this mission to represent the Trump view, which is not that one, and Vance came out strongly espousing the Trump view. So the guy who's trying to walk the fence was forced to jump off the
It's
fence and
like
get on
playing
one side of
Twister.
the lawn.
It's like playing Twister.
Exactly right. Sarah Scott, do you have a winner or a loser?
I'm going to say what I think is probably an obvious winner from the week is Jason Osborne and the rest of the House Republicans and even the Senate Republicans also. They had a good week. They drew
Mhm.
attention to the income tax issue yet again. This was an issue that Democrats would have preferred died a month ago now, and they have done a fantastic job of continuing to keep it relevant and in the
Right.
news. And I think it's going to be a big boost for their fundraising. They got Democrats to show up at the hearing yesterday and say some great one-liners that they're now going to be using in fundraising emails. So I would say it was a good week for them.
Yeah, and you have to say that if the leadership, like House Democratic leader Alexis Simpson, hadn't foolishly said, "Well, our only objection is the procedure. We just needed more time," because I mean, Jason Osborne, you don't have to be like the Machiavelli to figure out, hey, okay, here's some more time. Here's a hearing. It was just really bad politics craft, and I would say that the loser this week is yet again the same loser we've had for about 2 months now, which is the voters waiting for some campaigns. Jeez Louise, we've had candidates who have gone through 2, 3, in Morris Sullivan's case, 4 fundraising cycles now. Where's the campaign? Come on, what's going on? Where's an ad? Where's a cause? Where's a story? Where's the debate? The House Republicans are doing more and having more fun and generating more of a narrative for our politics, even though they're in the least influential spot of anybody. Meanwhile, you have people running for U.S. Senate and U.S. Congress and governor, and they might as well be at the old folks' home playing dominoes. So the voters, we're ready, particularly politically engaged voters. Another bad week for us, but it's a great week for listeners of New Hampshire Journal podcast because we have the lovely, talented Sarah Scott with us. Thank you so much. And then we had that Neil guy too. So no, I'm kidding, Neil. We love you. Neil Levesque, New Hampshire Institute of Politics. Thanks so much for listening. Really appreciate it.